I have the tremendous benefit of studying with some of the leading experts on psychoanalysis, psychiatry, psychology, and the nervous system science that's taking place today. I spent a lot of time in understanding the process of helping people, and as I mentioned before, after I finished my PhD with a double, triple concentration in a couple of fields, I knew there was more to do. So I was fortunate enough to be able to study in New York and with significant times in London and also in Boston with one of the top minds on the planet there in London and in Boston as well, in the Harvard Department of Psychiatry and in psychoanalysis. The reason I've spent these many years in school, because life is short and school is long, I wanted to be able to help people at the highest levels. And so what I've discovered is that we can actually change a nervous system, as I mentioned in my previous video posts, and that we now have more ability to actually mend a broken nervous system than we've ever been able to do before. So this is an exciting time. Someone was asking me recently about, am I a Freudian? Am I a follower of Freud? And I said, no, I'm not a follower of any particular doctor from the past, but I can tell you this one thing, that the scientific project, the neuroscientific project to rebuild nervous systems and to give people a new way of connecting on neural levels can now be accomplished. So what I'm doing essentially is I want to finish the job. I want to finish building your home, and the home happens to be an analogy, your nervous system. Trauma tends to be a very important subject today. I think most people have been through some kinds of trauma, whether it's, if you think of it as excessive stress, if you think of it as stress overload, or if you think of trauma as existing in maybe TTC. Little t would represent the small kinds of traumas that most people have gone through in life. It's tough living on this planet without going through some stress overload, losing family members, losing loss of loved ones, seeing tragedies take place. A number of my friends have experienced personal tragedies of losing a loved one, especially their children. So I would call that maybe somewhere between a little t trauma to a capital T trauma. And of course the capital T traumas would include the obvious. It would include things like being traumatized, being sexually traumatized, being physically, emotionally traumatized by a loved one or some type of perpetrator, family member of sorts. So I would call the capital T traumas what we think of typically today, the post-traumatic stress disorders, and the whole host of disorders that fall under that kind of genre would fall under what I would call capital T traumas. And then there are what I would call the C's, whether it's a capital C or a small c, the kind of cumulative traumas that people have gone through. When people say to me, Doc, I will never need your services, and I say to them, well, why don't you sit down? I'm sure we'll find something. And the reality is that everyone who's alive has experienced some kind of trauma, and maybe it's been cumulative trauma. The person who becomes a very accomplished piano player, when her aging mother says, but you're really not as good as Susie who's playing down the street, or the left-handed jabs that people get, you look like you've lost weight, but you still have so much more to go. All kinds of things that accumulate that are part of the human system, the dysregulated system, nevertheless, is very stressful and very difficult. What I'm asking in these videos is for people to retrain. I saw a number of medical doctors that are very skilled, board certified in their areas, in their field, whether it's in surgery, in anesthesiology, or in cardiology. I've asked them to consider retraining. And what I mean by retraining is that they need to think less in terms of localization, that when they look at a kidney malfunctioning, when they look at a liver not functioning, and those enzymes are not doing well, if we're looking at addictions and things like substance abuse and all sorts of addictions, rather than simply relegating them to some sort of formula or a 12-step system, let's think of them in light of a whole dynamic system. Since today in science, especially cutting-edge science, we're looking at people and very complex systems in non-linear ways. That the linear being that these are systems that operate by themselves. They kind of operate independently and isolated. We now know that that's not the case for human beings, from medical systems to nervous systems. We need deep connection, and I want to teach you how to do that. I believe that the regulation process is the way that we should be moving in our day and age. It's learning how to do it. I believe that people, when they ask me, how do we regulate you? How do we encourage you? And I say to them, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I don't think you can, because you don't know how to do it. You don't have the skills. I think the skills are necessary. And I believe that Christian people need to learn the skills. I believe non-Christian people also need to learn the skills of how to regulate, how to relate together. There's a flurry of information that's now coming down the neuroscientific pike, and it's about the brain. And that there was a famous case about 100 years ago, a guy named Phineas, who was a wonderful, caring father, husband, who was never at work, never late. He was always on time. He was the ideal model worker. And then something tragic happened. There was an explosion on the railroad over 100 years ago, and a metal pipe went through his right side of his brain. And the doctors, he survived through that process, and the doctors were able to, the brain specialists of the day, were able to pull out that beam out of his head, out of his brain, from the lateral, from the right side to the left. And as a result, Phineas was never the same. He became an alcoholic. He would never work on time. He became very unfaithful on his family, his wife, his children. Was not the loyal, dependent father and husband and worker that everyone knew him. So as a result of those studies, those brain studies and trauma and brain tragedies like that, or traumatic brain injuries, as doctors we like to call that, over 100 years ago, the landscape now has changed, that now we can actually plumb the depths of the brain, the mind, the body, and we can actually see that these are systems that are not working independently, that they work together in a dynamic relationship. And that dynamic relationship, think of your computer or your internet or your cell phones, that they're all working together. And when the systems are working like they should, when everything is working together on all levels, then we can see how this nervous system can actually work as well. And that's what I believe that we can do today. We can rebuild nervous systems and be able to help people in a preventive ways instead of just trying to do damage control, and is what most people are doing when they go see their local doctors, their local physicians at whatever level. You see, here's the premise. The premise is that prediction errors and symptoms will emerge when the regulation process is not in place. And that regulation process has to be taught, and it has to be modeled in an office like mine with a doctor like myself, who's a clinical neuroscientist, who can help his patients from day one understand what's happening in the nervous system. I want to be able to take this to the listening audience, to the viewing audience, and be able to offer you a two-track theory. One track would be to understand how relationships are supposed to function from a medical and scientific perspective. And then that would be track one. And then track two would be to learn the intricacies of the nervous system. You don't have to become a neuroscientist to do this. This is not being taught in typical departments of neurology or psychiatry, but this is the new wave of the neuroscientific explosion. I am a clinical neuroscientist, which means that I see patients and I'm in touch with the science that's happening in the laboratories with brain imaging and what's called the transcranial magnetic stimulation and functional neuroimaging. I'm in touch with that. My former professors are at the forefront of that, as well as my former classmates. But because I'm in a private practice, I want to take this invaluable science and bring it down to folks on all these different levels. You see, I believe that the things like ADD, ADHD, things like the early childhood problems originate because of the nervous system dysregulating at an early age, and maybe within the first year, 2 years of the infant's life. We can now see this scientifically, we can see it through brain imaging, and this is no longer an opinion, but it's the reality that now that something new can be seen and discovered, and then we can do something about it. And the objective is to learn how to do it together and to repair the nervous systems that have been compromised through life, through whether it's simple trauma to complex traumas, through broken relationships, and the whole vetting process. I'm excited about working with you and talking with you and introducing to you my viewing audience, my two-track theory of how to rewire together. And I hope you'll join me and stay in touch and hold on to your seats. There'll be many, many things coming down our way. And take care, and thank you for viewing.